the wind doesn't howl anymore. It gave up a long time ago, just like everything else on this dying planet. There's no birdsong. No distant hum of traffic. No voices calling out from the streets below. There is only silence, the kind of silence that doesn't bring peace but instead wraps itself around your chest like a vice, squeezing until you can barely breathe. Reminding you with every hollow second that you are utterly and completely alone. And standing at the edge of that silence, on the shattered rooftop of what was once Lotte World Tower, Seoul's tallest skyscraper, a symbol of human ambition and pride, is a single man. His name is Kang Seong-ji. He is 31 years old. His hair, once black, is streaked with gray. His body is covered in scars, long jagged ones across his ribs from the claws of a B-rank Fang stalker, a burn mark crawling up his left forearm from the breath of a Drake commander. A thin white line across his throat where a betrayer's blade came within a millimeter of ending everything 3 years too early. His boots are cracked. His coat is torn. His sword, a battered, chipped thing that lost its enchantment 2 months ago, hangs loosely from his right hand, its tip dragging against the broken concrete beneath his feet. He looks out over the city. Or rather, what used to be the city. Seoul is gone. The skyline that once glittered with neon and glass is now a graveyard of collapsed towers and blackened rubble. Entire districts have been swallowed by dungeon breaks, massive tears in reality where the abyssal gates vomited monsters into the world and never closed. The Han River has turned to a dark, viscous sludge that pulses faintly with corrupted mana. And the sky is the worst part. It's not blue. It's not gray. It is a deep, bruised purple, cracked like shattered glass, with veins of crimson light bleeding through the fractures as if the atmosphere itself is wounded and dying. 7 years. That's how long the apocalypse has lasted. 7 years since the first gate appeared, a shimmering oval of light in the middle of Gwangwaman Square that everyone thought was a publicity stunt until the creatures poured out of it and tore 43 people apart in broad daylight. 7 years since the world learned that monsters were real, that mana was real, that a thing called the system had been sleeping inside the fabric of reality and had finally decided to wake up. 7 years since ordinary people started receiving status windows, skill trees, and class assignments, and since humanity learned the horrible truth that awakening didn't make you a hero. It just made you a slightly harder target. Seong-ji remembers all of it. Every single day. He remembers the panic of the first week, when governments collapsed and the military's weapons proved almost useless against anything above D rank. He remembers the formation of the first hunter guilds, desperate alliances of awakened humans who banded together not out of nobility but out of raw, animalistic survival instinct. He remembers the guild wars that followed, when humans turned on each other for resources, for mana crystals, for territory. For the petty illusion of power in a world where real power belonged to the things crawling out of the gates. And he remembers the faces. God, does he remember the faces? Park Ji-seok. The tank who held the line at the Busan fortress for 14 hours straight so that 1,200 civilians could evacuate, and who finally fell when his shield skill shattered and 3 rift. Crawlers tore him apart from behind while he was still screaming for the others to run. Moon Soyeon, the archer who could hit a target from 800 meters and who died not in battle but from mana erosion disease, a slow, agonizing condition where your own awakened energy eats you alive from the inside because the system gave you more power than your body could contain. Old Man Kwan, who wasn't even awakened, who had no skills, no status window, no powers at all, but who spent 4 years cooking meals for hunters in a crumbling shelter in Daegu. Keeping people fed and sane, until a dungeon break swallowed the entire district overnight. He remembers every single one of them. And he carries every single one of them. Not as motivation. Not as fuel. Just as weight. Enormous, crushing, suffocating weight that presses down on his shoulders every morning when he opens his eyes and realizes, once again, that he is still alive and they are not. Why him? He's asked himself that question 10,000 times, and the answer has never changed. It wasn't because he was the strongest. He wasn't. His combat class was a modest B rank, a blade drifter, a mid-tier melee class with decent agility but nothing spectacular. He didn't have legendary skills. He didn't have divine artifacts. He didn't have the kind of overwhelming power that the S-rank hunters wielded in the early years before even they were hunted to extinction by the escalating monster tiers. No. Kang Seonji survived because he refused to die. That's it. That's the entire secret. While others froze, he moved. While others hesitated, he swung. While others broke down and surrendered to despair, he gritted his teeth until they cracked and kept putting one foot in front of the other, not because he believed he could win, but because stopping felt like betraying everyone who had already fallen. And now here he stands. The last one. The absolute last living human being on the face of the earth. He knows this because the system told him. 3 days ago, a notification appeared in his status window, cold, mechanical, indifferent, the way the system always delivered its messages. As if the extinction of an entire species was just another data point to be logged. Global population, 1, congratulations. You are the final survivor. Congratulations. The system actually used that word. Seonji had stared at the notification for a long time, and then he had laughed, a broken, hollow, terrible sound that echoed across the empty rooftop and disappeared into the void. Congratulations. As if this was an achievement. As if outliving 8 billion people was something to be celebrated rather than the most devastating punishment the universe could possibly inflict. But the system isn't done. It never is. Because now, as Seonji stands on the rooftop with nothing left to fight for and nothing left to protect, the sky directly above him begins to split open. Not like the usual gates, those are localized tears, contained ruptures. This is different. This is the sky itself peeling apart like skin being pulled from muscle, revealing something behind it, something vast and dark and ancient. The air pressure drops so violently that Seonji's ears pop and blood trickles from his nose. The temperature plummets. The corrupted mana in the atmosphere begins to spiral upward like a vortex, drawn toward the opening above. This is the final abyssal gate. The last one. The one that doesn't release monsters, it consumes. It's here to devour what remains of reality itself, to fold this broken world into the abyss and erase it from existence entirely. Seonji watches it open, and for the first time in 7 years, he feels something close to peace. It's over. It's finally, truly over. He can let go now. He can close his eyes and let the void take him and maybe, somewhere on the other side of oblivion, he'll find them again, Park Jiseok and Moon Soyeon and Old Man Kwan and all the others who went before him. He closes his eyes. He exhales. He begins to let the sword slip from his fingers. And then the system chimes. His eyes snap open. A notification hovers before him, glowing with a light he's never seen before, not the cold blue of standard system messages, not the red of warnings, but a brilliant, searing gold that seems to burn against the purple sky like a second sun. Condition met, final survivor detected. Calculating reward. Reward calculated. Final survivor privilege, regression, unlocked. Seonji stares at the words. His breath catches. His heart, which had already begun to slow in acceptance of death, suddenly slams against his ribs with violent force. Regression. He knows that word. Every hunter knew that word. It was a myth, a legend whispered in shelters and around campfires during the darkest nights. The idea that the system, buried somewhere in its incomprehensible code, contained a function that could send someone back in time. No one believed it. No one had ever seen proof. Until now. Before he can react, before he can even process what's happening, the golden light explodes outward from the notification and engulfs him entirely. The rooftop beneath his feet cracks and dissolves. The sky above him fractures into 1,000 pieces like a mirror being struck by a hammer. Time itself seems to stutter, he can feel it, actually feel it, moments layering on top of each other, folding, collapsing, reversing. 7 years of memories rush through his mind in a torrent, every battle, every loss, every sleepless night. Every desperate decision, compressed into a single blinding instant of absolute sensory overload. And then everything goes dark. When Kang Seonji opens his eyes again, he is lying on a cheap mattress in a small, cluttered studio apartment. Sunlight, real, warm, golden sunlight, is streaming through a window with intact glass. He can hear traffic outside. Car horns. A distant siren. Someone in the apartment next door is playing music, some pop song he vaguely recognizes from years ago, from before. He sits up slowly. His body feels wrong. Not injured, just weak. Soft. His muscles are thin. His scars are gone. He raises his hands in front of his face and stares at them. Smooth. Uncalloused. The hands of someone who has never held a sword, never punched through a monster's hide, never dug a grave for a friend in frozen soil. His eyes find a calendar on the wall. The date reads March 15th. 1 year before the apocalypse. 1 full year before the first gate opens in Gwangwoman Square. The system sent him back. Not to the beginning of the end, but to a time before it. A time when the world is still whole. When the people he lost are still alive. When everything that went wrong hasn't happened yet. His hands are trembling. His vision blurs. For a long moment, Kang Seonji, the man who didn't cry when his entire squad was wiped out in the Incheon dungeon collapse. The man who didn't flinch when he had to put down a friend who'd been corrupted by abyssal mana, presses his palms against his face and breaks. Completely. Silently. Tears stream through his fingers and drip onto the cheap bedsheet beneath him, and he makes no sound at all, because 7 years of grief have been locked behind a dam that just shattered all at once. But it doesn't last long. It can't. Because even as the emotion floods through him, his mind, that razor-sharp, battle-hardened mind, is already working. Already calculating. Already remembering. He wipes his face. He steadies his breathing. He reaches instinctively for the familiar presence of his status window, the blue interface that every awakened human can summon at will, the screen that displays your level, your class, your skills. Your stats. Nothing appears. He tries again. Focuses harder. Wills it into existence with the same concentration he used to activate combat skills mid-battle. Nothing. Blank. Empty. The system hasn't activated yet. It won't, not for another year. And when it does, there's no guarantee he'll awaken with the same class, the same abilities, the same potential. He is, in every measurable sense, an ordinary human being. No skills. No stats. No enhanced strength or mana reserves. Just a 24-year-old man in a tiny apartment with a part-time job and a body that has never trained for war. The weight of that realization hits him like a physical blow. He has the knowledge. He has 7 years of combat experience burned into his neurons. He knows every dungeon break location, every monster classification, every evolution pattern. He knows which cities will fall first and which geographic positions will become critical strongholds. He knows who among the future awakened will become humanity's greatest champions, and more importantly, he knows who will become its greatest traitors. The guild leaders who will hoard resources while civilians starve. The politicians who will sell out entire populations to protect themselves. The hunters who will kill other hunters for mana crystals and rare drops. All of that knowledge is inside him. But knowledge without power is just a different kind of torture, because you can see the disaster coming and you still can't stop it. Unless he builds the power himself. From scratch. From nothing. Seonji stands up from the bed. His legs are unsteady. This body hasn't run in months, let alone fought. But his eyes, if anyone were in the room to see them, are not the eyes of a 24-year-old college dropout working part-time at a convenience store. They are the eyes of a man who has stared into the abyss for 7 years and walked out the other side carrying the ghosts of everyone who didn't. He walks to the window and looks out at the city. Seoul. Alive. Intact. Bustling with 8 million people who have no idea what's coming. Cars move through intersections. Students walk to class. Street vendors sell tteokbokki on corners. A couple argues playfully on the sidewalk below. A child chases a pigeon across a park. All of it. All of them. 1 year from now, the first gate will open, and the dying will begin. And if he does nothing, if he simply lives this year as an ordinary man and waits, everything will happen exactly the same way. The same cities will fall. The same people will die. The same cycle of chaos and betrayal and slow extinction will play out, and he'll be right back where he started, standing on a broken rooftop at the end of the world. No. Not this time. Kang Seonji turns away from the window. He picks up a notebook from the cluttered desk, a cheap, spiral-bound thing with a coffee stain on the cover, and he opens it to the first blank page. He begins to write. Names. Dates. Locations. The coordinates of the first 50 gates that will appear across South Korea. The names of the people who will awaken as S-rank hunters. The names of the ones who will betray humanity. The resource deposits. The safe zones. The kill patterns of every monster type up to A rank. He writes for 4 hours without stopping, filling page after page with information that no one else on the planet possesses, his handwriting growing more intense with every line. His jaw clenched so tight that his teeth ache. When he finally stops, the notebook is nearly full. He stares at it. An entire apocalypse, condensed into ink and paper. A roadmap of the end of the world. And then, quietly, so quietly that even if someone were standing right beside him, they might not hear, Kang Seonji speaks. This time, I won't just survive. He sets down the pen. He looks toward the window one last time, where the sun is beginning to set over a city that doesn't know it's living on borrowed time. I'll make sure no one has to. And in that cramped, unremarkable apartment, in a world that still believes in tomorrow. The last survivor of the apocalypse begins to plan the war that hasn't started yet, with no power, no system, no skills. And nothing but the unbearable weight of everything he's already lost driving him forward into the unknown. Because Kang Seonji knows something that no other human alive understands, the end of the world isn't a single event. It's a chain reaction. And if you know exactly where the first domino falls, you don't need to be the strongest person in the room. You just need to be the one standing in the right place at the right time, with the right knowledge and the will to use it. And he has all three. The clock is ticking. 1 year remains. And the men who outlived the end of everything has just begun to fight. The morning after his regression, Kang Seonji doesn't waste a single breath on sentimentality. There's no time for that. Not when the clock inside his head is already counting down, 365 days until the first abyssal gate tears through reality in the middle of Gwangwon Square and paints the streets red with the blood of the unprepared. 365 days until the screaming begins. Until the system awakens. Until the world as everyone knows it ceases to exist. 365 days. It sounds like a lot. It isn't. So Seonji does what any soldier would do when handed a second chance on a battlefield he's already lost. He stops thinking like a fighter and starts thinking like a general. Because in his previous life, he learned the hardest lesson the apocalypse had to teach: strength alone doesn't save anyone. Infrastructure does. Resources do. Networks do. The guilds that survived the longest weren't the ones with the most powerful hunters, they were the ones with supply lines, defensible positions, and access to mana-rich territories where awakened humans could train and grow stronger without being interrupted by dungeon breaks every 72 hours. And Seonji knows exactly where every single one of those territories is. Within the first week, he empties his meager savings and takes out every loan his unawakened, unremarkable civilian identity can secure. It's not much, roughly 40 million won, barely enough to buy a used car and a few months of rent. But Seonji doesn't need a car. He needs land. Specifically, he needs a crumbling, abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of Incheon that no one in their right mind would invest in, a district that sits directly on top of what will become one of the densest mana convergence points on the Korean peninsula once the apocalypse triggers. In his previous timeline, this area became a war zone fought over by 3 major guilds, and hundreds of hunters died trying to claim it. Right now, in this timeline, it's worthless. The property company practically thanks him for taking it off their hands. He buys it for a fraction of what it will be worth in 11 months. And then he does it again. And again. Abandoned farmland in Chungcheong province, future site of a natural mana spring that produces crystals capable of enhancing awakened abilities. A bankrupt commercial building in Busan's Port District, the exact location where an A-rank dungeon will materialize and produce some of the most valuable monster cores on the continent. A foreclosed apartment complex near Taejun, which will become one of the only structurally sound shelters in the region after the first wave of dungeon breaks levels everything else in a 5-kilometer radius. But land costs money. Far more money than a 24-year-old with no connections and no credit history should be able to access. So Seonji turns to the one weapon he has that no one else on the planet possesses, knowledge of the future. Not just the apocalypse. The financial markets. Because Kang Seonji remembers, with vivid clarity, the exact sequence of economic events that preceded the system's activation. The cryptocurrency crash in June. The sudden collapse of Hanjin Electronics stock after their CEO's embezzlement scandal breaks in August. The unexpected surge in rare earth mineral futures when global tensions spike in October. He remembers all of it. Not because he was a financial genius in his previous life, but because when you spend 7 years scavenging through the ruins of civilization, you end up reading a lot of old newspapers and financial reports in abandoned offices, trying to understand how the world fell apart before the monsters even arrived. Knowledge born from desperation, now weaponized with surgical precision. Within 6 weeks, Kang Seonji's net worth has grown from 40 million won to nearly 3 billion. He operates through a web of shell accounts and proxy investments, never putting his real name on anything large enough to trigger regulatory attention. But money at this scale doesn't move silently. It can't. And somewhere in the glass towers of Gangnam, people are starting to notice. People like Chairman Go Myung-soo. The head of Taishin Group is not a man who tolerates mysteries. His conglomerate controls roughly 12% of South Korea's construction and defense industries, with quiet fingers in pharmaceutical development, private security, and political lobbying. He is 63 years old, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, and possesses the kind of calm, patient cruelty that allows a man to destroy a competitor's career over dinner without ever raising his voice. In Seonji's previous timeline, Go Myung-soo was among the first corporate leaders to recognize the apocalypse not as a catastrophe but as an opportunity. While millions died, he hoarded awakening stones, monopolized mana refinement technology, and built a private army of awakened hunters loyal only to him, not through inspiration, but through debt, blackmail, and the systematic exploitation of desperate survivors who had nowhere else to turn. By year 3 of the apocalypse, Taishin Group controlled more territory than the remnants of the Korean government. By year 5, Chairman Go was personally responsible for the deaths of over 6,000 civilians, not through direct violence, but through deliberate resource starvation of settlements that refused to submit to his authority. Seonji knows exactly what this man is. And now, this man is looking at him. A report lands on Go Myung-soo's desk, a brief from his financial intelligence team flagging unusual investment patterns. An unknown individual, operating through layered proxies, making seemingly random property acquisitions and market trades that are generating impossible returns. The chairman reads the report twice, sets it down carefully, and tells his assistant to find out everything about the person behind these transactions. But Seonji isn't focused on Myung-soo. Not yet. Because right now, he has something more important to do, something that requires a different kind of preparation entirely. He begins visiting people. Ordinary people. Civilians who have no idea that in less than a year, their lives will be ripped apart and rebuilt around a system of power they can't yet imagine. He visits them because he knows who they'll become. Every awakened human he fought beside, trained with, mourned over, or buried in his previous life, he remembers when and where they awakened, what class they received, and what their potential ceiling was. And right now, they're all still normal. The first person he approaches is a retired boxer in Suwon named Do Kyung-tae, a man who, in the previous timeline, awakened as an A-rank brawler class and held the Northern Seoul defense line for 8 months before mana exhaustion claimed his life. Seonji finds him running a small gym that's barely staying open. He doesn't tell Kyung-tae about the apocalypse. He can't, not yet, not without sounding insane. Instead, he offers to invest in the gym, upgrade its facilities, and bring in specialized trainers. The only condition, Kyung-tae has to commit to an intensive physical conditioning program that Seonji designs personally. A program built around the exact physical foundations that complement the brawler class's skill tree, explosive power, joint resilience, cardiovascular endurance patterns that align with mana circulation pathways that don't exist yet but will in 11 months. Kyung-tae is suspicious but broke. He accepts. Seonji repeats this process 7 more times over the following weeks. A former track athlete in Daegu who will awaken as a speed-type assassin class. A structural engineer in Busan whose spatial awareness will translate into a rare barrier mage classification. A quiet, unremarkable office worker in Sejong City who, in the previous timeline, turned out to be one of only 3 S-rank awakened on the entire peninsula, a woman named Cha Minjung who could manipulate gravity itself, but who awakened too late and with too little support to make a difference before the world had already fallen too far. Seonji finds each of them. He creates reasons to bring them into his orbit: investments, job offers, training opportunities, scholarships. He tells none of them the truth. He simply places them on paths that will make them stronger, healthier, and more prepared for what's coming, even though they don't know what that is. And then there's Yoon Harin. She's 22. A third-year university student studying nursing at Yonsei. She has dark hair that she keeps in a low ponytail, round glasses she's constantly pushing up her nose, and a quiet, steady demeanor that makes her almost invisible in a crowd. She volunteers at a free clinic in Mapogu on weekends. She lives alone. She doesn't have many friends. In Seonji's previous timeline, Yoon Harin awakened as a healer, not just any healer, but a Radiance-class restoration specialist. One of the rarest and most powerful support types in the entire system. Her abilities could mend shattered bones in seconds, purge mana corruption from infected tissue, and in her most advanced state, temporarily reverse death itself within a 60-second window. She was extraordinary. She was irreplaceable. And she was murdered in year 4 by the vice-captain of the very guild that had recruited her, killed not by monsters, but by human greed. Because her healing abilities were so valuable that the guild's leadership decided it was safer to bind her soul to an artifact and use her power perpetually than to risk her ever leaving. Seonji remembers the day he found out about her death. He remembers the cold, hollow feeling in his chest. He remembers thinking, if she had survived, if someone had protected her, hundreds more people might have lived. He approaches her carefully. Not as an investor or a benefactor, but as a stranger who shows up at the free clinic with a minor injury and strikes up a quiet conversation. He doesn't push. He doesn't recruit. He simply talks to her, asks about her studies, listens to her describe her dream of becoming a trauma surgeon. And when he leaves, he makes sure to place a small, anonymous donation to the clinic, enough to keep it running for another 6 months. Enough to keep her connected to the medical world, building skills that will become the foundation of abilities she doesn't yet know she'll possess. As he walks away from the clinic, Seonji's expression is unreadable. But internally, a single thought repeats like a drumbeat. This time, no one touches her. No one. Weeks pass. The preparations accelerate. Seonji's network of future awakened grows slowly but deliberately. His financial empire, invisible to the public but increasingly visible to the wrong people, continues to expand. And Chairman Go Myung-soo's investigators are getting closer to identifying him, peeling back layers of proxy companies and anonymous accounts with the kind of resources only a conglomerate can deploy. But none of that is what stops Seonji cold on a Tuesday evening in late April, standing on the rooftop of his newly acquired Incheon warehouse. Reviewing construction plans for fortifications he intends to have in place before the first gate appears. He looks up at the sky. It's sunset. The clouds are painted in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful. Normal. Peaceful. Except for one thing. There, directly above the Incheon coastline, so faint that you'd miss it entirely unless you knew exactly what to look for, is a crack. Not a crack in a building or a road. A crack in the sky itself. A hair-thin line of slightly darker color against the evening atmosphere, barely distinguishable from a wisp of high-altitude cloud. But Seonji doesn't mistake it for a cloud. Because he's seen this before. He's seen what these cracks become. They are the precursors to abyssal gates, the first microscopic fractures in the barrier between Earth and the abyss, appearing weeks or sometimes months before a full gate materializes. The problem is, this crack shouldn't be here. Not now. Not for another 11 months. In his previous timeline, the first signs of dimensional fracturing didn't appear until days before the Gwangwoman Gate opened. There were no precursors. No warnings. The apocalypse arrived without announcement. But this is different. This is the abyss stirring early. Reaching toward a world it shouldn't be able to touch yet. Which means something has changed. Something in the timeline has shifted, perhaps because of his regression itself, perhaps because of forces he doesn't yet understand, and the apocalypse isn't going to wait 12 months. It might not even wait 6. Sionji stares at the crack in the sky, and for the first time since his return, the cold, controlled confidence he's been operating with falters. Just for a moment. Just long enough for a single bead of sweat to trace its way down the side of his face. His 12-month head start just became a race he might already be losing. And somewhere in a penthouse office in Gangnam, Chairman Go Myung-soo sets down a file containing a photograph of Kang Seonji's face, taken by a security camera outside a property registrar's office, and smiles the thin, patient smile of a predator who has just identified something interesting. "Find out everything," he says quietly to the men standing beside his desk. "And I do mean everything. The storm hasn't arrived yet. But the air is already changing." And Kang Seonji, standing alone on a rooftop in Incheon with the weight of a dying future on his shoulders, realizes that building an empire from scratch was never going to be the hard part. The hard part is building it fast enough. The sky over Incheon did not darken gradually, it split. Without warning, without omen, without the courtesy of time itself, space tore open like a wound forced into existence. A jagged, spiraling fracture stretched across the air above the city's central district, bleeding out a suffocating darkness that seemed to devour light itself. The abyssal gate had opened. 6 months too early. For a brief, suspended second, the world didn't react. People stared upward, confused, phones half-raised, conversations frozen mid-sentence. The sound came next. A low, guttural vibration, like something massive breathing from the other side of reality. And then, it began. From the ruptured void, creatures spilled out. Not 1. Not 10. Hundreds. E-rank monsters, grotesque, feral, and starved for blood. They hit the streets like a flood breaking through a dam. Blackened limbs, distorted jaws, eyes glowing with predatory madness. They didn't hesitate. They didn't roar. They attacked. Screams erupted instantly. Cars collided. Windows shattered. People ran, but there was nowhere to run. The military responded within minutes, but minutes were too late. Soldiers poured into the streets, rifles raised, voices trembling behind forced authority. Open fire. Bullets rained down on the creatures. But the monsters didn't fall. Rounds tore into their flesh, but their bodies twisted unnaturally, regenerating, adapting. Some lunged forward even faster, as if pain only sharpened their hunger. What the hell are these things? No one had an answer. Because this wasn't supposed to happen yet. The awakening system, the very force meant to balance humanity against this nightmare, had not activated. At least, it wasn't supposed to. Then, a sharp, mechanical chime echoed in the minds of millions. A cold, emotionless voice followed. Global emergency protocol activated. Awakening system initializing. Human survival probability critically low. Across the city, across the world, people froze as translucent blue windows flickered into existence before their eyes. And then chaos multiplied. Some collapsed, clutching their heads as foreign energy surged through their bodies. Some screamed. Some changed. Mana, raw, unstable, and completely unregulated, began manifesting within random individuals. Fire burst from trembling hands. Lightning cracked through the air. Bodies hardened, mutated, or broke entirely under the strain. This was not awakening. This was forced evolution. And most were not ready. A man, barely in his 20s, stared at his hands as flames ignited uncontrollably. I got powers. His joy lasted less than a second before the fire spiraled out of control, engulfing a nearby car, and the civilians trapped inside. Elsewhere, a newly awakened tank type froze in terror as a monster lunged, unable to process the reality of what was happening. Strength meant nothing without the will to use it. And so the city burned. But in the middle of that hell, one man moved differently. Kang Seonji did not hesitate. The moment the gate opened, he had already started running. Not away. Toward it. His eyes were calm. Not fearless, no, there was something deeper. A chilling familiarity. Like a man returning to a battlefield he had died on countless times before. Because in a way, he had. 7 years of death. 7 years of watching this exact nightmare unfold. He knew every sound, every movement, every mistake. And he refused to repeat them. Seonji vaulted over a flipped car, landing smoothly as he pulled a reinforced blade from his back. Not a relic. Not a system weapon. Just steel. But in his hands, it was more than enough. A monster lunged. He didn't look at it. His body moved first. A single step. A slight tilt. The creature's claws missed him by centimeters. Then, slash. The blade carved through its neck at a precise angle, severing the spine in one clean motion. It dropped instantly. No wasted movement. No hesitation. He kept moving. 3 monsters ahead. 1 crouched. 2 flanking. Seonji's eyes flicked across them. Left lunges first. Right delays half a second. Center charges blindly. He stepped forward. The left one attacked. He pivoted, minimal movement, driving his blade into its exposed rib gap. Before it fell, he kicked its body into the path of the second, disrupting its attack. The third came screaming. Seonji ducked low, slicing upward, straight through the jaw, splitting its skull. 3 kills. Less than 5 seconds. To anyone watching, it looked inhuman. To him, it was routine. Over here. Please, help. A group of civilians was trapped behind an overturned bus, monsters closing in from both sides. Seonji didn't slow down. He reached into his belt, pulling out a small metallic device. A trap. He tossed it ahead, click. A burst of compressed mana detonated outward, momentarily stunning the monsters. He dashed in immediately. Move, he barked. They didn't argue. Something in his voice cut through the panic. He carved a path, precise, efficient, guiding them through the chaos like a blade through flesh. One by one, he pulled them out. Then another group. Then another. Time blurred. The battlefield shifted around him, but Seonji adapted seamlessly, always one step ahead of the monsters. Because he knew them. He knew everything about them. Their instincts. Their weaknesses. Their deaths. Then, it appeared. A shift in pressure. A silence in the chaos. Even the monsters hesitated. From the gate, something larger descended. A field boss. Its body towered over the street, 4 arms, plated hide, eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. The air around it warped slightly, as if rejecting its existence. The military opened fire instantly. Explosions rocked its body. Smoke cleared. It hadn't moved. We can't damage it. Panic spread through the ranks. The boss stepped forward. And then, it attacked. In seconds, an entire squadron was wiped out. Crushed. Torn apart. Power meant nothing against something they couldn't understand. But Seonji understood. He watched it for half a second. That was enough. Outer plating reflects impact. Inner joints vulnerable. Core exposed during third attack pattern. He exhaled slowly. Then he ran. Straight at it. Hey! Are you insane? He didn't respond. The boss swung. A massive arm crashed down, Seonji slid under it. Second arm, he stepped inside its range. Too close for its strength to matter. The third arm came from behind. He expected it. Twisting mid-step, he avoided it by inches, driving his blade into the joint. The creature roared. Its body shifted. Third pattern. Now. Seonji moved faster. He climbed its arm, using its own momentum, launching himself toward its chest as the core began to expose itself. For a split second, everything slowed. 7 years of memories. 7 years of failure. Every swordsman who died trying this. Too slow. Wrong angle. Hesitation. I won't make the same mistake. His grip tightened. And then, he struck. The blade pierced the core. A perfect angle. A perfect moment. The boss froze. Then, it collapsed. Silence followed. Then disbelief. He had done what an entire military force couldn't. Alone. A chime echoed. The system recognizes a temporal anomaly. Seonji's eyes narrowed. Assigning unique classification, Architect of Ruin. You will not receive skills. For a moment, even he paused. Then the next line appeared. You will design them. Heh. Not surprise. Not confusion. Understanding. Of course. This world had no idea what to do with someone like him. So it gave him something unprecedented. Limitless potential. And absolute responsibility. Nearby, a girl collapsed to her knees. Yoon Heron. Her body trembled as a soft light began to glow around her hands. A healer. Just like before. Tears streamed down her face. I can't. I don't understand, Seonji approached quietly. This moment. He remembered it. The fear. The isolation. The moment that had broken her. Not this time. You're okay. She looked up, startled. You're not alone. His voice was steady. Grounded. Real. The chaos around them didn't disappear, but for her, it lessened. And this time. She didn't break. Far away, high above the city, surveillance drones hovered silently. Inside a dark room, a man watched the footage. Chairman Go Myung-soo. His expression remained calm. But his eyes were cold. Interesting. The data scrolled rapidly across the screen. Kill count. Movement patterns. Survival rate. All centered around one name. Kang Seonji. Not awakened. Yet stronger than any awakened present. A variable. An uncontrollable one. He'll disrupt everything. His fingers tapped lightly against the desk. Then he spoke. Remove him. Quiet. Simple. Final. Back on the battlefield, Seonji stood alone. The chaos had begun to settle. But something new had begun inside him. Mana gathered at his fingertips. Unrefined. Untamed. But guided by something far more dangerous than instinct. Experience. 7 years of watching others fail. 7 years of understanding why. He closed his eyes. Then shaped it. Not copying. Not borrowing. Creating. A blade of pure mana formed in his hand. Sharp. Perfect. Optimized. Abyssal severance has been created. He opened his eyes slowly. The world felt different. Not because it had changed. But because now, he could change it. In my last life, his voice was quiet. I learned how the world breaks. The mana blade hummed softly. A promise. A weapon. A beginning. In this one, his grip tightened. I'll learn how to forge it. The aftermath of the Incheon Gate break didn't bring unity, it brought a feeding frenzy. As the dust settled over the ruined city, the world fractured into a chaotic new order where governments scrambled to create bureaucratic management systems. And megacorporations greedily seized territorial control over active mana zones. In this new era, your social class was no longer determined by your bank account, but by the letter printed on your awakening status window. S-rank hunters were treated like living gods, while E-ranks were thrown into dungeons as disposable meat shields. Amidst this rising tide of corporate greed, Kang Seonji officially establishes his own organization, Guild Zero. It is a name that represents exactly what they are, a group starting from nothing, operating outside the glitzy sponsorships of conglomerates. Seonji doesn't recruit the famous or the powerful. Instead, he tracks down the forgotten, the abandoned, and the betrayed. He gathers the people who, in his previous timeline, were chewed up and spit out by a corrupt system. To the public, Guild Zero is a joke, a ragtag collection of low-rank nobodies and rejects. But what the world doesn't see is what happens behind closed doors in Seonji's fortified warehouse. Using his 7 years of future battlefield experience, Seonji becomes the ultimate architect of their growth. He doesn't just train them, he engineers their futures. He designs custom skill paths and specialized combat strategies for abilities his recruits haven't even fully manifested yet. He knows the exact pressure points of their mana pathways, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. Within weeks, this overlooked group of civilians is forged into a precision strike force. They don't fight with overwhelming brute force, they fight with terrifying synergy, moving as a single, lethal organism where every movement covers a teammate's blind spot. Seonji watches them grow with a cold, detached satisfaction. He is building the army he never had in his first life, turning trauma into a weapon. The first true test of Guild 0 arrives when an A-rank dungeon materializes in the coastal city of Busan. Inside its depths lies a mana heart, a dense, crystalline engine of pure magical energy capable of permanently supercharging an awakened's core. It is a prize that can elevate a mid-tier guild into a global superpower. Chairman Go Myung-soo, seeing the ultimate opportunity to monopolize the next generation of hunters, deploys his private military guild, Taishan Vanguard, to execute a hostile takeover of the raid site. When Guild 0 arrives at the dungeon gate, they are met not with monsters, but with heavy artillery, high-grade magical barriers, and the arrogant sneers of elite corporate mercenaries. Taishan Vanguard expects these upstarts to flee at the first sight of superior numbers. Instead, Seonji gives a single, quiet command, and Guild 0 breaches the perimeter with terrifying, practiced efficiency. The clash inside the subterranean caverns of the Busan dungeon is absolute chaos. Taishan's hunters unleash a barrage of standardized, high-tier fireballs and gravity wells, but Guild 0 flows through the attacks like shadows. They know exactly how long the cooldowns for Taishan spells are. They know the precise elemental weaknesses of their armor. Seonji steps into the center of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the enemy formations. The system inside him hums, acknowledging his unique architect status as he activates his self-designed skill, Collapse Blueprint. In Seonji's vision, the physical world strips away, replaced by glowing geometric lines of mana and magical circuitry. He doesn't just see an enemy spell, he sees the architecture of it. With a flick of his blade, Seonji strikes the structural weak point of a massive, S-rank defensive barrier. The golden dome shatters into millions of harmless glass shards. He systematically dismantles Taishan's entire offensive line without breaking a sweat, unraveling spells before they can even leave the caster's fingertips. Watching from the rear, Yoon Harin heals a wounded teammate, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and growing dread. She watches Seonji move with an unnatural, prophetic grace, countering abilities he has never seen before in this timeline. During a brief lull in the fighting, as the dust settles around them, Seonji glances at his inner circle. He can see the questions burning in their eyes, the silent demands for an explanation as to how he knew every trap, every ambush, and every enemy weakness. He gives them a partial truth, his voice devoid of emotion. He tells them he possesses a gift of foresight, a rare sensory passive that allows him to predict probabilities. The others accept it, eager to believe in their leader. But Harin looks deeper. She notices the heavy, suffocating exhaustion buried deep behind Seonji's calculated eyes. She sees the way he looks at them not as new friends, but as ghosts he is desperately trying to keep alive. She begins to suspect that the truth is far heavier, and far more painful, than simple precognition. The battle reaches its bloody climax at the dungeon's heart, where the massive mana heart pulses with violet energy. Standing before it is Jang Doksu, the S-rank captain of Taishan Vanguard. Doksu is a pyromaniac covered in tactical armor, his hands wreathed in roaring, white-hot flames. In Seonji's previous life, this man was a monster wearing a human skin, a butcher who used the chaos of a dungeon break to lock 3,000 innocent survivors inside a shelter and burn them alive just to test his power. Seeing him now, arrogant and untouched, triggers a cold, volcanic rage inside Seonji. Doksu sneers, unleashing a tidal wave of incinerating fire that melts the cavern stone. But Seonji doesn't flinch. Activating Collapse Blueprint alongside his own martial prowess, he slices directly through the center of the inferno, his blade cutting the thermal energy itself. Before Doksu can even process what is happening, Seonji closes the distance. In a blur of steel, Seonji disarms the S-rank captain, slams him into the cavern floor, and presses the cold edge of his chipped blade directly against Doksu's throat. The surrounding mercenaries freeze, their weapons dropping in sheer disbelief. An unranked nobody has just neutralized the nation's premier fire mage in seconds. Seonji leans down, his shadow eclipsing the terrified captain. He doesn't press the blade to kill. Instead, he looks Doxa dead in the eye and whispers words that freeze the captain's blood. He tells him that in another life, he personally buried the people Doxa burned, and that today, he is giving him one chance to be different. Seonji sheathes his blade, leaving a hyperventilating Doxa on the floor, and claims the mana heart. As Guild Zero exits the dungeon victorious, the global awakened community fractures with a single, burning question that dominates every forum and news cycle: who exactly is Kang Seonji? And how does he know everything before it happens? The sky above Seoul was no longer blue. It hadn't been for weeks. Instead, it was a bruised, churning expanse of violet and crimson, choked with atmospheric mana so thick it felt like breathing glass. Across the globe, the orderly nightmare Kang Seonji had prepared for was disintegrating into absolute, unfathomable chaos. The abyssal gates weren't just opening anymore, they were multiplying, tearing through the fabric of reality at an exponential, runaway rate that defied every law of the system Seonji remembered. In London, Paris, New York, and Tokyo, rifts were opening inside hospitals, schools, and residential skyscrapers. The world's governments, which had only just begun to understand the concept of awakened hunters, were completely overwhelmed. Martial law had been declared globally, but when the monsters crawling out of the rifts are impervious to conventional firearms, a tank is just an expensive metal coffin. The social fabric of humanity was unraveling at the seams. Humanity's class-based arrogance, where corporate S-ranks looked down on the unawakened masses, vanished overnight in the face of absolute extinction. Wealth no longer mattered. Influence no longer mattered. There was only the terrifying, equalizing weight of the abyss. Standing on the reinforced rooftop of Guild Zero's headquarters in Incheon, Kang Seonji clutched his worn notebook so tightly his knuckles turned white. He stared at the pages he had written with such desperate hope just months ago: dates, names, coordinates, and monster wave predictions. All of it was useless now. The ink seemed to mock him. In his previous life, this level of global saturation didn't happen until year 5. The world was supposed to have a slow burn, a gradual escalation that allowed humanity to awaken, level up, adapt, and build defenses. Instead, reality was skipping ahead to the endgame. Seonji's blood ran cold as a devastating, sickening clarity washed over him. His regression hadn't just given him a head start, it had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the apocalypse itself. His interference, his prevention of deaths, his hoarding of resources, his surgical strikes against future threats, had acted as a foreign antigen inside the system. The abyss wasn't just a mindless wave of dungeons, it was a living, breathing entity, and it was reacting to Seonji's presence like an immune system hunting a virus. By trying to save the world ahead of schedule, he had inadvertently provoked the universe into destroying it faster. The crushing weight of guilt settled in his chest, a suffocating pressure that threatened to buckle his knees. Every life lost in these premature gate breaks was now a direct consequence of his arrogance. But there was no time for self-pity, because the true nightmare was only just beginning. High above the skyline of central Seoul, the clouds began to rotate in a massive, violent vortex. The air pressure dropped so precipitously that windows shattered across the metropolitan area, and a low-frequency hum vibrated through the very bones of every living creature in the city. Out of the eye of the storm, a gate manifested. It was not the shimmering blue or aggressive red of typical rifts. It was a monolith of absolute obsidian, miles wide, radiating a golden, malevolent light that blocked out the sun. It was an SS-rank gate, the highest classification the system could compute. The system windows of every human on Earth flickered violently before displaying a single, terrifying title: the Throne of Ending. Seonji stared at the monolithic structure, his breath hitching. He knew this gate. He knew it intimately. In his previous life, this was the tombstone of humanity. It had appeared in the 5th year of the war, serving as the final fortress that birthed the abyssal monarch, the cosmic entity that had ultimately exterminated the human race. It was the gate from which Seonji had been the sole survivor. To see it manifested now, in the very first year of the awakening, was a death sentence. Humanity was not ready. They didn't have the levels. They didn't have the gear. They didn't have the psychological conditioning to look into the maw of an SS-rank dungeon and survive the mental degradation that high-tier mana exposure caused. In the previous timeline, it had taken millions of deaths to forge a frontline capable of even standing before this gate. Now, they were expected to face it while still in their infancy. Xianji looked down at his trembling hands, and then he closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow. He had to make a choice. He could let the guilt consume him, or he could use it as fuel. He could yield to the despair of a broken timeline, or he could accept that if he was the reason the final boss was here early, then he was the only one who could stand against it. He opening his eyes, and the doubt was gone, replaced by a cold, incandescent fury. He had spent his previous life watching everyone he loved die. He would not do it again. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. Not while he still held his sword. Xianji didn't hesitate. He activated Guild Zero's communication network, broadcasting a message to every ally he had spent the last several months training, recruiting, and protecting. He called upon the government forces who had once viewed him with suspicion. He contacted the corporate guilds, including the battered remnants of Chairman Go Myung-soo's Taishan group, who were now paralyzed with fear. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false hope. He spoke with the brutal honesty of a man who had already seen the end of the world. He told them that the gate above Seoul was the end of all things. If they did nothing, they would die within 48 hours. If they hid, the monsters would drag them from their shelters. Their only chance at survival was to unite under one banner and charge directly into the heart of the abyss. To Xianji's surprise, the world listened. They didn't listen because they believed they could win, but because Xianji's voice carried the absolute, undeniable authority of someone who knew exactly what lay behind that obsidian gate. Within hours, a massive, unprecedented coalition began to assemble at the base of the End Soul Tower, directly beneath the hovering shadow of the Throne of Ending. It was a breathtaking, cinematic sight. Thousands of hunters from all walks of life stood shoulder to shoulder. Low-ranked civilian awakened stood beside elite, heavily armored corporate mercenaries. Guild Zero stood at the vanguard. Do Gyungti, the former boxer, cracked his knuckles, his massive fists glowing with condensed kinetic mana. Beside him stood the speed-type assassins and the elemental mages Xianji had scouted in their infancy, now forged into elite combatants. Even Jang Doksu, the disgraced Taishan S-rank captain whom Xianji had spared in Busan, stood there, his hands wreathed in flames. He met Xianji's gaze and gave a solemn, grim nod. The butcher had found a cause worth fighting for. And at the center of it all was Yoon Heron. She didn't wear heavy armor. She wore simple tactical robes, her staff humming with the warm, golden light of the Radiance class. Over the last few months, she had grown from a quiet nursing student into the beating heart of Guild Zero. She was the one who kept them sane when the training pushed them past their limits. She was the one who stitched their wounds when they fell. Now, as the coalition prepared to march into the greatest dungeon humanity had ever seen, she walked up to Xianji. She noticed the way his grip tightened on his sword, the way his shoulders were locked tight under the crushing weight of the world. Without a word, she reached out and placed her hand over his. A gentle, cooling wave of restorative mana washed over Xianji, washing away his physical fatigue and quieting the anxious thrumming of his heart. "You don't have to carry the silence alone anymore, Xianji," she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise of the assembling army. "We are here. We are choosing to stand with you." Xianji looked at her, and then at the thousands of faces gathered behind her. In his previous life, he was alone at the end. It was a solitary, bitter existence. But looking at them now, seeing the fire of defiance in their eyes, a lump formed in his throat. He swallowed it down, his resolve hardening into diamond. He raised his chipped, unremarkable blade into the air, pointing it directly at the obsidian gate above. "Move out." Xianji's voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by mana. "Clear a path to the throne." The roar that erupted from the army shook the very foundations of Seoul. Thousands of hunters surged forward, breaching the gravitational pull of the gate. As they crossed the threshold, the physical world of Seoul vanished, replaced by the internal dimensions of the Throne of Ending. It was a surreal, nightmare landscape. Floating islands of black stone suspended in a void of violet nebulae. Rivers of molten mana flowed through the cracks of shattered ruins, and the sky above was a graveyard of dead stars. This was the heart of the abyss, a pocket dimension that existed outside of time and space, feeding on the despair of conquered worlds. The moment the coalition entered, the abyss responded. Thousands upon thousands of nightmare beasts manifested from the shadows. Great, winged chimeras with eyes of burning sulfur screeched as they dove from the purple sky. Colossal, bipedal giants made of sentient obsidian swung clubs the size of houses, shattering the floating islands. The battlefield erupted into a cacophony of magic and steel. Guild 0 led the charge, executing the precision maneuver Seonji had drilled into their muscle memory. They didn't waste mana. They moved in rhythmic, overlapping formations. When the obsidian giants swung, the barrier mages intercepted the kinetic force, while the speed types shredded the joints of the monsters. Jang Doksu unleashed torrents of white-hot fire, melting the winged chimeras in midair. The government forces provided artillery fire with enchanted ballistas, while the healers, led by Heron, worked tirelessly in the rear, keeping the front lines topped off. Their golden light serving as a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. Seonji didn't engage the foot soldiers. He had a different destination. Cutting through the chaos, utilizing his self-designed agility skills, he bolted toward the highest floating island in the dimension. Resting upon it was a massive, Gothic throne carved from the bones of dead gods. And sitting upon that throne was a being of pure, unadulterated terror. The abyssal monarch did not look like a monster. It was humanoid in shape, towering nearly 12 feet tall, draped in ornate, shifting armor that swallowed the light around it. Its face was obscured by a helm of black thorns, and where its eyes should be, two pools of cold, ancient, cosmic starlight stared out at the universe. It didn't hold a weapon. It didn't need to. The sheer pressure of its passive mana aura was enough to make the air feel like lead. As Seonji stepped onto the final platform, his boots clicking against the dark stone, the abyssal monarch didn't stand up. It merely tilted its head, its voice echoing directly into Seonji's mind. It wasn't a sound, but a psychic resonance, cold, vibrating, and ancient. "You have returned, little survivor," the monarch resonated, the words dripping with amusement and a terrifying, ancient boredom. "We watched you weep on the rooftop of your dying world. We watched you accept your extinction. And we were the ones who gave you the prize you so desperately craved." Seonji froze, his blade lowering slightly. "The prize, regression. It was you." The monarch let out a sound like grinding tectonic plates, a laugh. "The system is not your ally, human. The system is our net, and we are the fishermen. Across a billion realities, across countless worlds, we play this game. We let one survive. We let them experience the absolute zenith of despair, and then we offer them the privilege of regression. Why? Because hope is the greatest fertilizer. When a survivor goes back, they panic. They change things. They disrupt the natural order of their timeline. And in doing so, they tear the fabric of reality wider than it was ever meant to open. Your desperate desire to save this world has acted as a beacon, allowing us to harvest your planet 4 years ahead of schedule. Your hope was our key. You didn't save them, Kang Seonji. You are the reason they are dying today." The revelation struck Seonji like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The guilt he had been holding at bay roared back with a vengeance. He had been a puppet. A tool. The abyss had used his love for his fallen friends, his grief, and his desperation as a battery to accelerate its own feast. He looked down at his blade, the very metal vibrating with the psychic weight of the monarch's words. It was an infinite loop of despair. No matter what he did, the system would use it against him. Regression wasn't a reward. It was the ultimate trap. "Now, surrender," the monarch commanded, slowly rising from its throne. As it stood, the purple sky fractured, and massive tentacles of shadow reached down from the void, ready to crush the army fighting below. Give your despair to the abyss. It is the only constant in the universe. Seonji looked down at the battlefield below. He saw Gyungti bleeding from a dozen wounds, yet still punching an obsidian giant with everything he had. He saw the government soldiers standing firm, refusing to run. He saw Heron, her face pale with exhaustion, her hands trembling as she continued to channel healing light into the fallen. None of them knew about the infinite loop. None of them knew they were supposed to lose. They were just fighting because they believed in tomorrow. They were fighting because they believed in him. Seonji's grip tightened on his blade. The trembling in his hands stopped. The despair inside him didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It transformed from a weight into a weapon. If the system was a rigged game, if the rules were written to ensure humanity's destruction, then the answer wasn't to play better. The answer was to tear up the rulebook and set the table on fire. "You're right about one thing," Sionji said, his voice quiet, cutting through the psychic pressure of the monarch. He began to walk forward, his pace steady, his eyes locked onto the cosmic entity. "The system is a trap. It's a loop. But you made one mistake when you sent me back. You stripped me of my status window. You stripped me of my prepackaged skills. You forced me to build my power from absolute zero. And in doing so, you gave me the one thing you can't control." The monarch paused, the shadows around it pulsing with sudden agitation. "What could an insignificant mortal possess that we cannot control?" Sionji smiled, a sharp, cold, predatory smile. "Authorization." In that moment, Sionji slammed his blade into the stone floor of the platform. His unique, architect classification flared to life. The invisible code of the universe, the raw binary of the system that governs mana, levels, and gates, suddenly manifested around him in trillions of glowing, golden lines of text. This was the ultimate evolution of his self-designed skills. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a defense. It was a rewrite. "I am the architect of ruin." Sionji roared, his voice echoing across the pocket dimension. "And I declare this system obsolete." He activated his ultimate, self-designed skill, Genesis from Zero. Instantly, the golden lines of text around Sionji turned white-hot. He wasn't swinging a sword at the monarch, he was plunging his hands directly into the source code of reality. Using his authority as someone who had bypassed the traditional system to design original skills, Sionji began to systematically dismantle the recursive loop. He tore at the threads connecting regression to acceleration. He unraveled the permissions that allowed the abyss to piggyback off his temporal anomalies. The strain was immediate and horrifying. No human vessel was meant to hold the architectural code of the universe. Sionji's skin began to crack like parched clay. Blood sprayed from his eyes, his nose, his ears. His muscles tore as the sheer volume of cosmic mana surged through his unawakened nervous system. His bones splintered under the pressure of rewriting cosmic law. He could feel his very life force being shaved away, second by second, as he burned his soul to power the spell. "Foolish human," the monarch shrieked, its calm facade finally shattering into primal rage. It raised a hand, summoning a spear of condensed dark matter capable of erasing a star. "You would kill yourself just to alter a single line of code. No mortal can overwrite the system. It is the absolute law of the universe. You are nothing before it." The monarch hurled the dark matter spear. It tore through space, a projectile of absolute deletion, heading straight for Sionji's heart while he was immobilized by his own spell. But before the spear could reach him, a shimmering, blinding dome of golden light erupted around Sionji. The dark matter spear slammed into the shield, detonating with the force of a nuclear warhead, but the shield held. Sionji blinked through the blood in his eyes. He looked behind him. Running up the obsidian steps, exhausted, bleeding, but their eyes burning with defiance, were the members of Guild Zero. At the front was Heron, her staff glowing with a blinding, incandescent radiance. Her face was flushed with fever, her own veins bulging from the strain of overchanneling her healing class, but she didn't stop. She poured every single ounce of her restoration mana into Sionji, sealing his cracking skin, mending his splintered bones, and reinforcing his heart as it threatened to burst. Behind her, Gyungti, the mages, the assassins, and even Jang Doxa formed a defensive phalanx around Sionji. Using their own bodies and skills to intercept the shadow tentacles and projectiles the monarch unleashed in its panic. "Focus on your work, Sionji." Gyungti roared, punching a shadow beast into dust. "We've got your back." The abyssal monarch hovered in the air, its voice vibrating with genuine, uncomprehending shock. "Impossible. Why do they bleed for you? Why do they throw away their lives? They are cogs in a machine. They are data. They are meant to submit to the system." Sionji, his body held together by the collective willpower and love of the people around him, looked up at the cosmic monster. The golden lines of code were dissolving, successfully unraveled by Genesis from Zero. The connection between the regression and the abyss was severed. The infinite loop was shattering. "That's where you're wrong," Sionji wheezed, blood dripping from his chin, but a triumphant smile on his face. You see them as cogs in your machine. You see them as numbers in your harvest. But I'm not overriding your system alone. I built something you never accounted for. I built a family of people who chose to fight beside me. Not because a status window told them to. Not because they were promised loot or levels. But because they believed this world was worth saving. And that choice is something your system can never compute. With one final, agonizing heave of his soul, Seonji slammed his palms together. The white-hot lines of text exploded outward in a shockwave of pure, structural genesis. It washed over the throne, over the floating islands, and over the abyssal monarch itself. The monarch let out a final, ear-splitting scream of existential horror as its armor began to pixelate and dissolve. The shadows holding up the pocket dimension began to unravel like burnt parchment. The obsidian throne shattered into millions of harmless glass shards. The SS rank gate, the throne of ending, began to implode on itself. The shockwave expanded out of the gate and washed over the real world of Seoul. Instantly, the blood-red and bruised purple skies began to clear. The atmospheric pressure stabilized. Across the globe, the multiplying rifts and gates began to shrink, their violet lights fading into nothingness as the system's aggressive, predatory loop was permanently severed from the planet. The monsters remaining on the streets turned to gray ash, their connection to the abyss severed. Inside the collapsing pocket dimension, the ground beneath Seonji's feet gave way. The dimension was folding in on itself, returning the hunters to the real world. Seonji's consciousness began to fade. The adrenaline was draining, replaced by the crushing exhaustion of a man who had just rewritten the universe. He began to fall into the dark void. But he didn't fall far. Soft, warm arms caught him. He opened his heavy eyelids to see Yoon Heron holding him tightly as the dimension dissolved around them. She was crying, tears washing tracks through the dirt and blood on her face, but she was smiling. The next moment, they were back on the plaza of the End Seoul Tower. The sun was rising over Seoul. It wasn't the violent, artificial sun of a dungeon, but the real, gentle morning sun of a world that had just been granted a tomorrow. Thousands of hunters collapsed on the pavement, gasping for air, looking up at a blue sky in absolute, stunned disbelief. They had survived. They had actually won. Seonji lay in Heron's lap, his body completely broken, unable to move even a finger. As he stared up at the blue sky, his vision blurred. One final system window manifested before him. But it was different now. The cold, blue interface was gone. In its place was a neutral, transparent window, displaying a message that wasn't a command, but a statement of fact. The apocalypse cycle has been broken. There will be no more regressions. The system is offline. This world is now truly yours to build. Seonji stared at the words until they faded away into the morning light. The system was gone. The loop was broken. There would be no more do-overs. No more knowledge of the future to lean on. For the first time in both of his lives, Kang Seonji was stepping into an unknown tomorrow. And it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Around him, the members of Guild Zero were laughing, crying, and embracing one another. Even the hardened mercenaries were weeping openly, staring at the sunrise. The social barriers that had divided them, the fear of the abyss that had choked them, it was all gone. They were just humans, alive on a planet that belonged to them again. Seonji let out a quiet, breathy laugh. Heron looked down at him, wiping a tear from her own eye as she squeezed his hand. "You did it, Seonji," she whispered. "You saved us." Seonji smiled, not the cold, calculating smile of a survivor, and not the weary smile of a soldier, but the bright, genuine smile of a man who was finally, truly free. He looked at his guild, at the survivors, and at the beautiful, normal, sunrise over Seoul. He was scarred, exhausted, and broken, but he was standing at the edge of a new beginning. He was no longer the last survivor. He was just a man. And he was ready not to fight for survival, but to finally, truly live.